5, 4, 3, 2,
Walk away from
1,
there, okay?
0.
The Most Honorable Silis Muhammad expands his record of achievement in the fight for Afro-descendant human rights and reparations for plantation slavery. In 1994, Mr. Silis Muhammad petitioned for reparations to the UN under the 1503 procedure. Mr. Muhammad delivered a 1503 communication to the UN Working Group on Communications on behalf of African Americans, now known as Afro-descendants. Before going into the actual document itself, let's gather some understanding of the definitions and a more general understanding of the UN itself. About the General Assembly of the United Nations. It was established in 1945 under the Charter of the UN. The General Assembly occupies a central position as the chief deliberative, policymaking, and representative organ of the UN. Comprised of all 193 members of the United Nations, it provides a unique forum for multilateral discussions of the full spectrum of international issues covered by the Charter. It also plays a significant role in the process of standard setting and codification of international law. The Assembly is empowered to make recommendations to states or international issues within its competence. It also initiated actions, political, economic, humanitarian, social, and legal, which have benefited the lives of millions of people throughout the world. UN Charter, a foundational treaty of the UN, which is an intergovernmental organization. This outlines the rights and duties of the member states and establishes the UN organs and procedures. The purpose of the UN is to maintain international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination for peoples. Claiming human rights. The complaint procedure. The overall reference for this procedure of the Human Rights Council is the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, adopted and proclaimed by the General Assembly of the UN on the 10th of December, 1948. Implementation of the procedure. The complaint procedure, also known as Procedure 1503, is a universal mechanism bearing the number of the resolution by the former UN Commission on Human Rights which established it. The procedure is confidential and examines the human rights situation within a state. The Council, therefore, does not decide on individual cases. The individuals or NGOs who file a complaint will not be informed about the steps taken. Generally, they receive as the only answer a letter confirming the reception of the complaint. Anonymous complaints are not accepted. That has been modified, I believe. You can research that. The complaint procedure allows an examination of such complaints which reveal the existence of a consistent pattern of gross and reliably attested violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Once the Council received several individual cases which form a consistent pattern of gross systematic human rights violations which are reliably proved, it can decide to examine the situation of the human rights in the country concerned. As previously discussed, NGO, a voluntary group or institution with a social mission which operates independently from the government. They operate independently from the government, usually nonprofit, which shows a sign that they are not trying to do something to make money for themselves. And we will talk about the NGOs involved with this petition at another time. So this communication was received on the 18th of March, 1994. I'm fortunate enough to have a copy of this document in particular. You can get it on Amazon if there's any left. The last time I bought it, I think it was the last one. Now I've seen some more recently on Amazon. So the next page in this book is the acknowledgement. And this is how it reads. This historic petition constitutes a request for United Nations assistance in the establishment of a forum, perhaps under the auspices of the Subcommission on Human Rights, similar to the one opened for the Aboriginal peoples in Geneva, so that African American human rights grievances appertaining to reparations and self-determination can be expressed, systematically and officially recorded, evaluated, and remedied. I give special thanks to the many individuals, groups, and organizations who have labored and paved the way for this petition to be made manifest and become a reality. I shall make mention of the names of a few exceptional individuals, leaders, and groups whose efforts all culminate into the single document. W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, Malcolm X, even though he greatly deviated from his teacher, Queen Mother Moore, Congressman John Conyers, and the Congressional Black Caucus, for although they seek a domestic solution, their efforts satisfy the legal requirements of the international community by showing that the United States government has been approached and given ample opportunity to settle its own domestic affairs, but has not. A very special thanks also goes out to Dr. Y.N. Clyde, Diana Collier Clyde, Harriet Abubakar, Theodore Egan's, William Davis, Janice Miller, Robert Brock of the Self-Determination Committee, Jonita Obadil, and Kalanji Olusugan, co-chairs, and other members of NCOBRA, Minister Louis Farrakhan, and others for their exceptional efforts and dedication. And last but most certainly not the least, that divine leader and teacher to the so-called Negro, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the last and greatest messenger of Allah, peace be upon him. Without his presence of mind to lead us to acquire a land which we can call our own, this petition may never have been undertaken, completed, and delivered by the Nation of Islam on behalf of its members and all African American descendants of slaves. Signed, Silis Muhammad, Petitioner and Chief Executive Officer of the Lost Foundation of Islam, Atlanta, Georgia, USA, May 27th, 1994. Very professional, very gentlemanly, very unselfish, and in the spirit of unity. Now headed into the preface. We, the African descendants of slaves, the so-called African American, the so-called Black American, the so-called Negro, have never tasted of the freedom that so many millions of other members of the human family enjoy, safeguard, and treasure. We are the only people on this planet that have had to endure over 400 years of the most brutal, dehumanizing slavery the world has ever known. We continue to suffer to this day from the scars of that slavery and from institutions of racism in the United States of America that deprive us of our human rights. This historic petition to the United Nations marks an end of one era and beginning of another. It marks the end of the struggle for liberty that many Black Americans have fought within the boundaries of the United States in an attempt to get our former slave masters to give us what we were born with, our human rights. We as a people have survived the post-Civil War when we were released from the physical chains and told to go with little or no assistance from the United States government. We even survived the violent and frightening reign of terror of the Ku Klux Klan and the White Citizens Councils. During the years of the Great Depression, we suffered the most. During World War II, Black soldiers were placed on the front lines to defend a nation that inflicted insults of the worst kind upon them. their families and loved ones who sought to exercise their human rights in places of public accommodations and in the workplace. We have had many great leaders during this era, leaders who begged and pleaded to the government and to the white majority Americans to do what is right and just. Among to name a few, have been Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and Booker T. Washington. The push for civil rights in the 60s brought us into a period wherein we experienced an even more cruel fate. We were led to believe that integration would be a cure-all for our woes. With this integration, we were to be able to experience life in the United States as to do the majority of white Americans. Several decades into the system of forced assimilation reveals that the glass ceiling will continue to block the vast majority of us from ever truly arriving. Our great leaders, Thurgood Marshall, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, proponents of integration, did not intend to dedicate their lives' work to a system that would still manage to keep us under control. But under control, we still are. We have had several great leaders with the wisdom to see that in order to be truly free, we must be able to exercise all of the rights that citizens of our other nations exercise. We must have the right to self-determination, which includes the right to decide our own destiny, study and perpetuate our own history, culture, and languages, have real political power in determining and electing officials that will be able to protect rights and needs peculiar to African Americans, and even to return to Mother Africa with substance in order to undo the damages of slavery. Among these leaders were W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and Malcolm X. We now are at the beginning of a new era wherein we now will take our struggle for true and complete freedom to the international community via the United Nations. Our leaders in this arena is the Most Honorable Silis Muhammad, my husband, who has dedicated his life working and carrying out the mission of his leader and teacher, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He is working day and night to enable African Americans to sit down as equals with officials of the government of the United States in a forum governed by the United Nations, so that this government will have to answer for its systematic and continuous gross violations of our human rights protected under the international law. So great is his love for his people that he has placed his life on the line in order to ensure that African Americans are afforded the right to self-determination and to receive justice in the form of reparations. I, along with countless others, pledge my love and loyalty to him in this great and historic endeavor. Those of us in this spiritual battle are warriors and are reminded of the sayings of the prophet Isaiah. For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. The Bible, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 5. Signed, Mashaki Muhammad, Attorney General of the Lost Foundation of Islam, Atlanta, Georgia, USA, May 27th, 1994. Very well stated there. March 18th, 1994. Petition for UN assistance under Resolution 1503. Mr. Boutros Ghali, Secretary General of the UN, United Nations, Geneva, Switzerland. Reason: The past and present gross violations of the human rights of the African American people to self-determination by means of official U.S. policies of slavery, segregation, and forced assimilation, and the refusal of the U.S. government to apologize and offer any compensation or reparations for these violations. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas both the fundamental rights of members of minorities to exist in equal status with the majority, as well as the historical oppression and resulting present inequality and circumstances of the African American descendants of the formerly enslaved Africans in the U.S. are well known. Keeping in mind that Articles 1 and 55 of the UN Charter specifically refer to the principle of self-determination. One of the basic purposes of the UN, according to Article 1 and 2, is to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. That Article 55 explicitly ties the principle of self-determination to respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for all or part of its people. That the principle of self-determination is implicated in chapters 9, 12, and 13 of the Charter. That in the years since 1945, the principle has found its way into both the international covenants, the Declaration on the Granting of Independence to Colonial Countries and Peoples, the Declaration of Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the decisions of the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion in the Namibia and Western Sahara cases, just as it has been upheld by the UN General Assembly in relation to numerous recently emerging Eastern European nations, and that although long applied only in the colonial context, it has increasingly been appealed to in the post-colonial age by minorities and secessionist movements, to the extent that today legal scholars, even as before suggested, the UN itself have generally agreed that the principle of self-determination may well apply outside of the colonial context, though within strict limits. Keeping in mind that Articles 1 and 55 of the Charter commit the UN to the promotion of universal respect for human rights and basic freedoms, while Article 56 gives members nations an obligation to act jointly or separately to achieve the purpose set out in Article 55. That is, Article 56 creates a duty to act to promote respect for rights and freedoms, and that when the core human rights rooted in the principle of autonomy are grossly, systematically, and persistently violated, UN intervention to end that violation is morally and legally permissible, since the principle of autonomy implies that the government is only justifiable if the government and its policies are an expression of the self-determination of peoples. Now remember, this is the complaint procedure. This is where you lay down your case and you have to prove your case in order to be heard. This complaint procedure allows an examination of such complaints which reveal the existence of a consistent pattern of gross and reliably attested violation of human rights and fundamental freedoms. So this paves the way to the rest of the case. This is where it starts. Now, I'm not going to keep going on and read the rest of the document to you. I gave you the gist of it, and I started off in the beginning. There's a lot more left. There's a lot more to do your research on and study and, check out what was said. I have my own. I have done it, and I can do it over and over again. So check it out. The case is hammered and nailed in. I don't want to give you thoughts. I want you to think for yourself, read the document and check it out for yourself. But this document And these proceedings paved the way for a lot of other things. Just think about the date. This was in 1994. A lot of people didn't know what reparations was. We didn't talk about reparations. There wasn't all of these conversations as it is today. Now the whole conversation of reparations is everywhere. And we've even gotten some sort of reparations up to date, if you agree with that. But anyways, keep listening and stay tuned so you can hear the track record of the most Honorable Silis Muhammad in human rights, and study and look at things for yourself. Don't listen to the hearsay. This is epic.